Friday afternoon, downtown Honolulu, folks. Ted Ralston here, hosting our show, Where the Drone Leads. As you know, we talk about that subject 3/4 of the time on this show, and we have a lot of superb guests. In fact, this show is known by the guests that come on it, such as today's guest, John Mullen, standing by in San Francisco. Hi, John.
Hi there, Ted.
John has been a frequent flyer on this show, heavily involved in the network activities and drones and things like that. And the episode tonight is the overall show is Where the Drone Leads, but if the drone's going to lead somewhere, you have to find out where that drone is in order to track it and find it. And tracking drones and determining their presence and determining whether they should be there or not, this sort of thing. This is going to be an interesting part of the future of drones. We've normally talked about all the good things going on here. In fact, last time we had John on a couple of weeks ago, we had Mike Brown on in Atlanta at the same time, and we were talking about the potential adverse uses of drones. Well, John has had some recent experiences, John, on that account of the first level of determining tracking and such for drones being potentially misused. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, we constantly have been thinking of both sides of the equation, Ted. As you know, with military, we think of positive and negative because we're spy versus spy versus spy versus spy. But anyway, we have been involved in the Rose Parade and the Rose Bowl, and providing the surveillance, security, and reconnaissance for that facility. And you can tell when you have a very, very good level of surveillance because it doesn't feel like you have much surveillance. So there was all this stealth cameras and monitoring and everything, but it was a very safe facility. Almost 1 million people live, and then many millions on TV. And then the Rose Bowl itself had one of our partners from the Aerospace Corporation, and they were testing a new facility where they could, if you pick out any drone in the sky, they could tell exactly where and who was controlling it, monitoring it, and where that was coming from, which is a very useful set of technologies for, looking for people that may be doing something incorrectly, right?
That's pretty cool. So this is real. This is here now. That is, you were at the Rose Parade, at the Rose Bowl, with both method-based extrapolation and analysis, to coin a phrase, as well as detection of potential drone activity. Did I hear that right? Is that what was going on?
Oh, sure. And then we also had a lot of cameras hidden in lots of places, and then analytics behind the cameras, software that looks at the video stream and determines what's going on, and all of that sort of stuff. But basically, to the observer in the parade and to the people on TV, it looked like there wasn't much security, but actually there was a whole lot of security, which is what you want. I mean, you don't want all this invasive, police marching down the street with guns. But you want to be protected, I think, right?
That's pretty great. So the kind of things you would see then, you would see visual images on video. You have some analytics looking at the video and extrapolating from that, or extracting from it features or patterns or something like that that would indicate adverse behavior. And then you have to have some way to display this, some way to make sense of it,
right,
and some way to communicate it to somebody should there be an action required.
That's right. That's all that's happened. You put out, first there's the typical that's been going on for many years in Europe, but not in the U.S. Due to laws, is facial recognition, where in Europe you go into any airport, if you have a face that is known to Interpol, you would have been tagged, even though you don't see any police walking around or anything, but you would certainly be seen and detected and observed and monitored and followed and maybe blocked. And now that's in the U.S. also. But it's the same sort of behavior, but now it goes further to, I know that we're looking for a Ford 2007 red truck, a Ranger with a dent in the left rear fender and license plate ABC12, etc., with maybe a partial license plate. You can do all that sort of stuff from software looking at the video stream. And then it tells the central spot, hey, I found this person over here, 3rd and Main and whatever, in the middle of Honolulu or wherever it is, right?
And so that's kind of an active online analysis system that then tells or gives some report to the officers or whoever in charge, and some action can be determined from that. And then you can go out and get your actual eyes on target and determine what action you want to take. But in the case of adding drones to that equation, they're a little different breed of cat than that 2006 Ford Ranger. They're in small cases. They may look like a briefcase or something like that, the way they can be luffed around. They can be launched from a quarter mile away or a half mile away. So that adds an entire new dimension, John, to the challenge here.
It does, and there have been some very, very powerful mathematics from many different groups, including University of Hawaii, where you actually can, if you're looking at an object and you're coming from a drone, you could be coming from 20 feet, 40 feet, 80 feet, 100 feet, and then you can also be the tilt and yaw and all the movement, so you don't have a static camera. But the software and the mathematics are there to be able to still discern individual identified objects, even with all of that movement and all of that control. So there's been a lot happening over the last few years from some very smart people who've delivered a lot of this, right?
It's great to be able to bring those smart people through your observations into this program. In fact, there's a few of them right down the street at Oceanit who aren't here today, but we can get them on the show at some point in time and talk about that.
That's one of the partners we work with, and they're one of the best in the world, actually, in this exact area.
Yeah, right. Just so folks heard that, that's Oceanit right down here in Honolulu, and we're talking about feature extraction from streaming video, which is a whole new dimension of information extraction and insight generation and assimilation of a status that might be out there, might be changing.
That's right.
That's
right.
Good. So, but this sort of leads to that function, that is video extraction and still extraction, as a whole science all by itself that is going to be central to drone discovery, as well as the other side of it, on board a drone doing real good work. I mean, there's no reason that same form of information extraction can't be on the software in the drone doing the work on the power grid or during surf rescue situation or land rescue or whatever, the fire prevention, fire protection, whatever the issue is that the drone is doing for good, that same software can be used there as well.
Well, I think that's the best place to do it. I don't think it makes sense to drive all the video across a network, because look what happens. You're sending terabytes of data across a network requiring extremely high bandwidth network, and 99.999% of that video never gets viewed by anybody at any time for any reason. So it's much better to have smart computers that are very tiny at the source, doing the analytics at the source, and then storing what you can on the new SSD cards that are terabyte in size, but they're only the size of a credit card. And so you can hold months worth of video data literally on the drone and not have to pump it. Especially, look at, if you've got 3 or 4 cameras in a building, you can certainly pump the data across the wires. But if you've got 1,000 cameras in a city, you're not going to be pumping that data across the wire. And no human could look at 1,000 cameras at once anyway. So you want those events to happen at the camera. And you want the data to be stored at the camera. A human can always come through the wire and look at the data at the camera, and once they're promised to do it. But it doesn't really make sense to pump all that data across the networks that never gets viewed. I mean, today, if you're in a city and you have somebody says something happened at 3rd and Main, somebody got attacked. What really happens is the police go and collect the data a day or so later, and then it takes a day or two to look at it, and it's 3 or 4 days before you actually go to try to catch the guy that did something wrong. If you can get the video analytics to happen right then at the moment, and you can stop them before they get 2 blocks. So it's a different world, but it does require a whole different software engineering, and I believe it's one of the future major sources of software engineering development, and University of Hawaii is right there in forefront of the world in this area.
What excites me is that, again, that the onboard side of that in terms of flight navigation guidance and control and determining your mission status by looking at the circumstances around you and using that as part of the navigation system on board. So you can not have to close loop on specific waypoints anymore or specific preordained path, but you can run your path through the sky of that UAV based on the mission that you need to accomplish. And so it's it kind of puts a pilot, a different form of autopilot on board the UAS, or UAV in this case. But John, that's such an arcane art. It's known to only a few people. One of them, thank God, is you, and you're, thank God, a friend of this program, so we can use this as a way to distribute that information. But how would we take that concept, that ability to extract information in that wholly different sense, and get users, such as police and fire and lifeguards and this sort of thing, to state their requirements or imply, impugn, somehow describe their requirements in terms that the video analytics people could hook onto that and start coming up with software filters and such that perform those missions. That's such a gap between how people operate and how they think today and what pictures are and they're familiar with, and then this whole new world over here on the other side of automatic extraction.
Well, we've been looking around the world, and there is a piece of software written by a policeman in Finland who had started to do a little bit of this. There's Cogvis out of University of Leeds in Europe, and the Europeans are a little bit ahead of us because, like I said, they were allowed to do this in airports, whereas the U.S., because of certain rules, ACLU, et cetera, for profiling, we're not allowed to do this. And so we're behind in the technology here in the commercial sense. But we're catching up quickly, I'll tell you. Okay. And there's also some people in Moscow who have some very sophisticated tools and technology. But you're right, most of the, what you say, rules are still developed by programmers and software engineers. And Oceanet is one of the leaders. I think they are the leader in the world. But there are some tools that allow people like policemen and firemen to actually build some of their own special rules. And my son is 21 years old, and some of his buddies who are in physics and math were asking, where should I go to study for my next, career move? And one of the things I was saying is you probably want to look at this area because I think it's going to explode as far as engineering, applied science for usefulness, because you can use it in traffic, you use it in self-driving cars, use it in drones, use it in first responders, emergency response. You can use it in many, many places, and there's going to be a lot done here.
I got an idea on that subject, that a project we've kind of started here. We'll talk about it after we get back from our first break.
Okay.
Aloha, I'm Rachel Yergin with Aging with Grace. Please join us every Tuesday on thinktech.com.
Okay, I'm Jay Fidel, that's Ray Starling. We co-host a show called Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy, every Wednesday, 4 to 5 p.m. It's really interesting. Ray has a way of unzipping these guys. He asks them these questions and all this stuff tumbles out, and we find out stuff we would never know about without Ray's questions. Thank you, Ray.
You're welcome, Jay. I'm very pleased to be your Ed McMahon every Wednesday at 4 o'clock here on the internet. So you can join us and see what's happening in the energy world, and there is a lot going on. So join us every Wednesday at 4 o'clock.
Yeah, come around, be energized right here on Think Tech. Aloha.
It is 4:18 on Friday afternoon, folks, downtown Honolulu, here in the Think Tech studios overlooking downtown. Ted Ralston here. And our host is 2,500 miles, our guest is 2,500 miles away, John Mullen, CEO of Promia in San Francisco. Welcome again, John. And John, we've had you on Skype so many times on this show, we have to get your actual corpus in here, sitting here at the table one of these days fairly soon.
I'd love it.
But what we were talking about before the break was the work you did at the Rose Bowl and the Rose Parade, determining patterns of behavior and determining whether there's any threats represented by those patterns, and some of the means by which video today can be used to generate the insight and the information in real time, and how that is like the harbinger of the future of where a lot of automatic analysis will need to take place in order to make drone discovery a factor, as well as drone navigation a factor. And you made the comment that this type of video analytic expression and understanding is useful for just about everything we're doing in the future, all the way from automobiles to medicine. And a great career path for kids who are thinking about that as some way to move forward here.
Yep.
To me, the interesting thing about that is you don't have to be in a place where there's a lot of large factory mechanical type installations. That's software design work. That's done in a laboratory. That's done in a collaborative environment, regardless of bricks and mortar. So it's something that this state of Hawaii, island of Oahu, and such could actually do very well in, because it's not dependent upon having a big Boeing factory right next door or something like that to generate the inspiration.
You get it off the internet. You can
Yeah.
get little tiny computers, and you can get a camera for less than $100 easily, and then you can get the software if you get the right connections through you and through others, and you can do it anywhere in the world. You can do it in your little lab at your house. I mean, it doesn't take that much. And it is a breakthrough it can be misused, however, and I know there's people on the call that will understand this, by, maybe not ethical authorities to, do big brother sorts of things here and there. But at the same time, it can greatly enhance and expand first responder and police response to help protect citizens worldwide. So it's a very powerful tool that we all have to be careful who and where uses it.
Well, we've got a couple of opportunities coming up next week that I'm thinking of taking this conversation forward to. We've got a meeting or a demonstration on Tuesday with a bunch of lawyers, and a demonstration on Thursday with some folks in the public safety domain. And I need to test those domains and see if they can grasp the idea of the automatic video analysis and such. And then we maybe use that to figure out how to create a science fair, if you will, around that subject. How would we got to expose this to the users, have the users take interest and express their needs in that context, so that we can put some tasking on the table that can be formed into tasks that students can do under NSF grants and this sort of thing, and actually push the state of the art forward. We've got to sort of bring together the users,
Yep.
who can capitalize on this, and the developers who don't know what the users need, and make that joint in the middle.
Well, it's very early right now, because we've looked around the world at everybody who does this stuff. We've looked very hard. And there are certain groups in Europe, but they don't expose the development capability to the end user. They say, if you want to develop certain rules for video analytics, come to us and pay us and we'll go do it. See, that's the way it's normally done in Europe and in Asia and in Russia. But thanks to your group, and thanks to some of the really advanced science guys, particularly University of Hawaii, you can, it's all about marketing and how you package and how you go forward, but it's also not the simplest kind of engineering technology to actually get your hands on and build their own rules yourself. But we have guys that are doing it, thanks to your help, Ted, and others, that are building our own video analytic rules. And if you're going to expose that to anybody in the world, it's not the simplest thing, but if you expose it to software engineers and the right kind of focus, it can certainly advance big time. So that's one area. The other comment I have is, we're researching audio analytics, where sound engineering. There's an old movie of Gene Hackman called The Conversation. It's an interesting one. Francis Ford Coppola brought it out the same year he brought out The Godfather, and he beat himself for the Oscar. He had two contenders, and Godfather won, but The Conversation was the second one. It's about manual sound engineering from intelligence agencies, where you put microphones all over the place, and then you pick up certain conversations and try to fuse them together. What we're trying to do is pick up intensity of sound for violent crime, kidnapping, rape, murder sorts of things in inner cities. Because microphones are much cheaper and more prolific than video, and trying to fuse that sort of knowledge with the video analytics to help shorten interdiction for first responders. So it's not just the video, it's also audio.
Well, that takes us right back to the whole UAS domain. We saw a demonstration in Boston a couple of weeks ago of a UAS, or a drone, navigating internal to an office building using the carpet and the video analytics, looking at the carpet and the carpet pattern change rate, as indication of forward motion, lateral motion, whatever it may be, and also using acoustic response from bouncing the signal off walls and
Excellent.
tables and things to begin seeing how that works. You mentioned University of Hawaii several times in this conversation. That sort of thing is also taking place in terms of the Kalman filtering and such of the signals coming into true Thurman and get the actual signal and get the self noise out of the picture so you can get the true external acoustic signature. But what that brings to mind is something I think I might have even sent you. Animals, little tiny insects, have only perhaps one sensor of some kind. They have one acoustic sensor, they have one visual sensor of some kind. They don't have a binocular vision like we do, or two sides of the head with hearing on it. They have just one. And they're able to navigate just fine. Bees going into flowers and this sort of thing, they don't miss their target, right? They're really right on it. They don't care if the wind's blowing, the flower's moving, they get there and they get their job done. So how do they do it? So discovering how these most simple biologic elements do that job is cool. And the example I remember was a singular ocular, I guess, as it advances, the scene compresses. As you back up, the scene expands, just like when you drive with your rear view mirror. You don't see three dimensions in the rear view mirror, you see a single frame. You look at expansion and contraction and rate of change to decide how to drive the car when you're in reverse. It's different than looking forward where you have binocular vision. So you would think, John, challenge to you, sir, that somewhere in the world of video analytics, there's this issue of scene compression or scene expansion or scene roll or scene sweep rate as indication of what the proximity of obstructions or the rate of progress or progression of the vehicle itself. And the two together are where the risk is. The closer the obstacle is to the thing and the faster you're moving, the higher the potential of risk. So managing your way around that and determining the flight guidance to avoid that situation, or capitalize on it if you want to hit it, that's your choice.
That's right, that's right.
Yeah,
if you're targeting for a
they're
bomb,
both there.
exactly.
But turning that into a navigation and guidance frame of reference, and that's just one, that's just the visual, but the audio as well. There's no reason that the audio couldn't be treated the same way in terms of the increase or decrease in signal volume and the with some directional aspects of the sensor, other factors as well. So pulling all this together into very small systems that sit on board and are $25, so if they throw them away when you're done, that's where the future is, John.
That's right. It's like the bats. If you're very
Yeah.
familiar with bats, I mean, they do a heck of a job with echolocation and sound, and they eat their weight in mosquitoes every day, thank God, or whether we overrun with mosquitoes. And bats are very good things, but they do amazing. If you ever watch them at sunset, how fast they fly. You almost don't see them. They never hit anything, and they're almost blind as a bat, and it's that sound that they're doing.
Okay. Let's talk about fish for a moment. Most fish have an eye on each side of their head. The two eyes, I don't think they're even coordinated. They probably operate separately. So you got a vision on one side and a vision on the other side. Somehow they fuse that signal into a picture of what they're dealing with. And I would guess the fish are surviving so they're able to catch their prey. Sharks have eyes on both sides of their heads. They catch their prey just fine. So somewhere there's that other factor of taking two different views and extracting at the common feature level. That is, if there's a common feature showing up in both views, it's probably the same thing. So maybe there's a way these guys structure that view path of what they're heading into based on fusion of two simultaneous signals from a different orientation, but happening to have some overlap.
Sure. Well, that's how horses, look at horses' eyes. They're completely separate. They can spin all over, and they do two together. But then flies and bees and bugs are generally, the studies of them show that there's 1,000 visions in each eye. I mean, there's all of that too. And then there's the nose, and most of those animals have a giant nose. Not bees so much, but the others. There's a lot going on with the sensors. I know, Ted, you're always looking at the motivation for steering and avoiding, and because I'm defense and I'm looking at bad guys, I'm always looking at anomalies and trying to see is somebody kind of coming to get me, right? So we're two sides of the same coin.
That's great, but we're going to need that, again, in this world of drones, which is where we kind of began the conversation. Right now, we look at them as onesies, twosies. You got one guy, one ground control station, one drone, it kind of a set. But there's 800,000 registered now on the FAA site? Imagine if they all showed up in Southern California or something like that. The sky would be black. You wouldn't even see the sun, there's so many drones. So we have to start treating them as a family and as a virus. No different than how you think of the viruses that affect the network or affect computer systems.
Right.
And so detection of that virus is by some form of pattern, I would presume. And what we're speaking of here is, in that sense, can be used to detect the pattern of misuse of something like drones. And so there's a third use here, which is observing the general and correct progression of operation, or is there some issue in there we have to go address?
Well, if you're talking about commercial, like right now you talked about the 800,000, those are all commercial, buy them off the shelf. And you can go down and find the unlicensed bandwidth, 900 megahertz to such and such gigahertz, and that's what they all use. And so you can go right into that little band, you can say everybody who's talking there, and they're commercial off the shelf, and maybe somebody does an accident, maybe somebody's doing this or that. You're talking real bad guys, they're not gonna use that bandwidth, they're gonna do their own. They're gonna be completely in a different scope, you know what I mean?
Okay. Let's hold that thought. We'll get right back to that. That's a really interesting issue. We got some activities coming up this year in Hawaii that I'd like to be able to bring that thought to after our break.
Aloha, I'm Keli'i Akina, president of the Grassroot Institute and host on Ehana Kako, a weekly program on the Think Tech Hawaii broadcast network. Ehana Kako means let's work together. Think of the sad alternative, let's not work together. Here in Hawaii, with all of our diversity and the richness of the people, it's important for us to come together around issues on the basis of what's right and what's good and what's going to serve the common good. And that's what we try to do at Ehana Kako. Every week we interview movers and shakers, people in government, business, and other sectors of society to talk about how to create together a better government, economy, a better world here in Hawaii that can bless the rest of the world. I thank you for your attention to Think Tech Hawaii, and we look forward to seeing you every Monday, 2 to 3 p.m. on the Think Tech Hawaii broadcast network. We're Ehana Kako, and we wish you well. Aloha.
We are back, folks, downtown Honolulu, 4:32 p.m. now, and 6:32 in California, where our guest John Mullen holds fort as the CEO of Promia, and he's at home right now, actually, his day's over. John's joined us again, and thank you very much, John, for the incredibly insightful discussions that you promote on this show. We were just talking before the break about radio spectrum that's used for controlling the commercial and available drones these days. And in fact, just for a moment on that subject, everything's, as you say, in the public networks these days, 1.2, 2.4, 4.8, 980. There's these open areas of frequency that are used for drone command and control, just like they're used for medical devices and garage door openers and everything else that the world wants to operate remotely, but doesn't want to have dedicated spectrum for. So it won't be long before that is too packed with all the drones that are out there for anything to work. A couple questions go through my mind. As we start filling up that bandwidth with signals, kind of what happens is, what's the observation we're going to see? It would be like question one. Question two is, as we move into the more regulated channels, which we don't know what they are yet, channel or band C is one of the potential thoughts. People are going to have to come up with software-defined radios or some other form of adjustable spectrum in order to keep track with the changing rules. So going back to the first part of the question, as we start seeing this saturation of drone or UAV activity in the public bands, what will be the symptoms of that overcrowding?
Things will start not working. I mean, you'll put your drone up, you won't be able to talk to it, basically.
So you probably can't even get the handshake going to start with.
Well, you might get it going to start with, it might fail in the middle of your conversation.
Ah. So you're up and flying, you're doing some inspection of some construction site, and suddenly it's not yours anymore. It goes away,
Yeah, your drone just drops to the ground, or hopefully does a feather fall or something, and drops to the ground or goes to home or whatever. I mean, and this may be a chance to finally get control of the drones, because this is what I'm saying, just like a car needs a license plate and a bicycle should have a license plate, and these sort of things, you may be able to actually start to regulate to say, if people can't make their drone fly in the toy mode that they're in right now because it's so saturated, they may have to apply for a license and actually be known and be licensed, which would be a good thing in my mind.
Does there exist somewhere a simulation of the spectrum framework that would be a place that this could be tested? Could we take
sure.
a sim somewhere?
Sure, there's a bunch of them. I mean, we use the ones in military, the Air Force and Navy, and there's a big one down down the Southwest.
When you're younger, you'd be able to think of it faster. I know exactly the
Sorry, I was
system.
going to say San Antonio, but it's not. It's in New Mexico, and but there's some and there's new ones coming up in California all the time. But when you have a protected waveform area, you have to make it very careful, because there's all sorts of commercial stuff that can interfere. I mean, right now, off of San Diego coast, you've got the Navy protected areas for testing, and in the middle of Nevada, you've got the Nellis Air Force Base testing areas, and you have to tell everybody, stay away, stay away, stay away, so that you can have a clear waveform area. It's not easy to do, because, early on, the first guy that I ever knew that did an electromagnetic pulse did it in the middle of the Mojave Desert. He brought an old Buick up there. I mean, this was in I think the 60s, and he jury-rigged something up to the front of his radiator on the fan belt, and then in the middle of the Mojave Desert turned this darn thing on and then walked away. And the authorities saw this big cone going out hundreds of miles that knocked out all electronic signals in all electronic devices for hundreds of miles, and then they went back and found this old broken Buick in the middle of the desert with a fan belt and this device pumping out this waveform. I mean, it's hard to do a pristine waveform for testing in an area to protect for the kind of tests we need to do. I mean, it's almost like making a Faraday box over 20 miles of land, you know what I mean, to protect.
But the other side of that is determining, without that Faraday box protecting it, in an unprotected environment such as we have here in Hawaii, what's the level of saturation we can take before we start seeing malfunction, before we start seeing inability to operate?
Valid questions we need to know,
Yeah.
right? All tests, and usually you turn to the military, and I can tell you, probably they have all those answers right now, Ted, but those are probably classified answers. So you ask the right people the right way, at the right question at the right time, and hopefully you can get an answer that we can use in the commercial sector that doesn't, hurt the military.
I just had an idea, John. We were both going to be at GIFIX next week, except GIFIX got canceled, right? So for this particular quarter, but JVAB, the Joint Vulnerability Assessment Bureau, they show up. I'll bet they have some simulation knowledge or access to simulations where we could maybe do some discussion about what the question I've asked. What's the saturation level that we're going to get before we have trouble?
And I'm sure Matt, the guy who did the testing in Rose Bowl, has some knowledge about that. Those guys have, they've got test labs, they've got a lot of stuff. And, there's a couple companies, TechFlow is a company that works with Air Force down in Arizona that's got a lot of knowledge in this area. So I'm sure we can dig a little bit and we can find it. But like I said, if you and I had a task to go build a test facility to test waveforms, it's not easy. It'll cost a lot of money, and you need to protect land to be able to do it. But
Okay.
Sure, there are some around.
So the question remains then, and I think we've agreed about that wherever the location may be, the island of Oahu where we are, for example, we really have to be fair in in providing information to our public safety people who want to get into drones. We need to know what the limits are. Where is the point when we can no longer reliably use these and they become part of the problem rather than part of the solution? That's like part one. And what do we do about that when that saturation level has occurred? How do we control them, reduce the non-involved participation to protect those who want to actually operate, which then leads to software-defined radios.
Right.
So, because we don't know yet what bands are going to be given to us and what the waveform is going to be on those bands. So SDRs, I've held in my hand the software-defined radio you had about a year ago. I presume that science and technology is moving forward and that SDRs are becoming more available than less. And,
Very, very quickly, very quickly.
and so something like that could be a new dimension of the UAS world. I mean, we're going to need SDRs on UAVs, no question about it.
Right, and actually, from my point of view of defense, we know that adversaries around the world, especially asymmetric warfare, these are non-necessarily state players, but they're maybe terrorists, etc. That's all they use, is what they get off the open source and internet and quick stuff. So those kinds of tools are very, very interesting to us, because it's what our adversaries use in identifying and thwarting drones. And also, I mean, with those things, you can get to any waveform, whether it's Wi-Fi or police band or garage door openers. Or,
Our adversaries are leading us in that direction. That's what
Exactly.
you're saying. We're paying attention to all the commercial stuff, which is cut and dried at 2.4, we'll say.
Right.
And the other guys they're the ones developing the SDRs. They're going to be able to get around all that.
and crack in, yeah. That's why we have to pay attention. That's why we do that stuff. You know.
Okay, good message there. But again, there's no question that that's going to have to be the way that UASs or drones go, because there's going to be the proliferation and the saturation is going to require, and the regulations are going to require operation in some bands other than we're operating today.
Exactly.
And what does that mean about all these millions that are out there? They're going to be quickly obsolete or unable to operate, or half of them will crash by then anyway, I suspect, because they're all, hobby-type toys. But there is a life limit then on these systems that are tied to the public bands.
Well, it depends on how fast people in their neighborhood get similar units. I mean, obviously, if you look at the cities in the United States, the cities around the world, how many people live in cities and what's the percentage? Well, if you're trying to fly your drone in downtown New York City, you're probably going to have some interference, not only from other drones, but from other waveforms, right? And so you're going to saturate there pretty quickly. If you're in the middle of the heartland, you probably can go for many, many years without saturating this. So, there's that kind of aspect to what's going on. But you and I have talked in the past that I think there's going to have to be some sort of embedded controls inside drones that keep them from going to unauthorized places. And I think, that's going to have to happen with new generations, new versions of drones. Obviously, if you have a drone today and it doesn't have any regulation in it, you can fly it anywhere. You can fly it, all over the place. The Iranians today said they flew some drones over U.S. aircraft carriers. Nobody knows if that's true or not, but they said it, right? So, but as we go forward, if you're going to have to control them internally to keep the user from doing something that they maybe shouldn't do, you're going to have some inherent controls. And that can't be with the current versions because they aren't there. It's going to have to be new versions.
But that's really, we haven't even talked about that on this show today. We talked about it with Mike was on the show when you last time in December, but that's the whole issue of geofencing or time fencing or other ways of minimizing or eliminating the penetration into a geospatial zone of some kind. But going back, this is really intriguing, this discussion of waveform saturation, and I'm just trying to calibrate my thoughts for next week with our discussions here with public safety. It's reasonable that we advise our public safety friends here right on Oahu that we got to start thinking about that problem now. And if they're going to operate UASs in support of fire or police or ambulance or lifeguarding, it has to work all the time. There can't be a situation where waveform denial or spectrum denial is an argument. That's not an acceptable argument.
Right.
And that means right now we could probably do that, but it's just purely on lack of saturation. When saturation starts happening, once again, the denial will be there. And,
right.
and the saturation is going to go to the first guy there. So when all the news people are there and all the people with their private systems are there, they're going to get there before the cops and the fire guys get there. And they're going to have the bandwidth saturated, taken. We're going to have to start a thought process for assured spectrum right now. And I don't even know what that means.
Well, we could jam everything else. I mean,
yeah.
You could. I mean, you could say police get first, even if somebody else is there, jam them out and put the police in. I mean, that's the sort of thing that may have to happen. Anyway, it's all about how fast are the current toy, or I won't say toy, but drones being deployed, because how how fast, how quickly are they? If they're being deployed very, very quickly, you're exactly right. We're going to have a big problem. If they're not being bought and deployed as quickly, then maybe we won't have as big a problem. But I don't know that rate of change of the deployment of the drones today. But you are in a unique situation in Hawaii because you do have, I mean, you look around you in all areas, you've got quiet waveforms. So you are in a unique situation where not the rest of the U.S. is got the same sort of problems. I mean, you've got actually some benefit there that you can control it maybe better than others.
I think so. And I was going to, I said after the last, before the last break, I wanted to introduce another subject to our conversation. We're running out of time here at the, as we always do. We'd be long before we get to what we wanted to talk about. But just briefly, we've conceived and discussed with the FAA several times a program that would be national. It would use the U.S. power grid, which means the substations, all the equipment inside, the transmission lines, distribution lines, and the poles and structural aspects of, and the easements, all the pieces that define the U.S. power grid. Use that as a frame of reference for determining best use of UASs in disaster operations as it applies to electrical power recovery.
Okay. Sure.
But further, the linearity and the geometric orientation of the power grid is a perfect, somewhat simplistic frame of reference for training the onboard video analytics to extract what they're looking at and determine not only navigation, but also determine errors or faults or failures in the power grid.
Or maybe people attacking it.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, it's there. And then that would lead us to beyond line of sight. The first really increments, baby steps in beyond line of sight. We'll talk about that on a follow-on program here. Our station engineer is reminding us that the clock has ticked past the point where we're at the end of our allocated time. So John Mullen, thank you so much again for the inspiring discussion. We'll not see you next week at GIFIX, but maybe in the May version. I'll see, Margie and I will be down in Australia. I'm not quite sure we'll be there in May either at that time, but we'll have you on the show here many more times, and we really need to get your actual body in here, right side by side, and go see the guys at Oceanit and go see the guys at UH and have this same discussion all together.
We'll do it.
John Mullen, let me read the sign here. One sign says, thanks for having me on the show. So I'm supposed to thank you for having me on the show, and thanks for appearing on Think Tech. You get your choice.
Thank you.
John, we'll see you again. Thanks a lot. And see you all next week, folks.
Hello, everybody. I'm IC Davidson. Thanks for tuning in to Think Tech Hawaii. One of the things that we do here, or the thing that we do here, is promote civic engagement in Hawaii. What does that mean? We want to talk about things that people want to hear about, and we want you to engage us and be part of that conversation. One of the ways that you can do that is by joining in during our live show via Twitter. How do you do that? Well, you get on the interwebs and get Twitter, get an account, and mention us if you have a question. What you'll do is you tune into our show live, tweet us questions, and our hosts and guests will address them accordingly. It's really easy, it's really fun, and I think that your participation in what we're doing here will help us continue the dialogue on very important issues that we're trying to cover. Sustainability, clean energy, you name it, we're on top of it. We want you to be part of what we're doing, because together we'll be able to make things change. Thank you for watching. Think Tech Hawaii, thinktechhawaii.com, weekdays 12 to 5 p.m.